Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Koo, and it's a very early morning today. Uh, Somehow today I woke up quite early in the morning, and I realized that I should shoot a video. I actually did these slides last night, and I sent it out via an email at first to my members in my investor club, and actually I found that a lot of people responded very positively to this topic. So today I'm going to talk about Iskandar Malaysia during the COVID-19 pandemic. The reason why I chose this topic was because many of you have been away from Iskandar Malaysia during this period because of COVID. Borders are closed, so I'm still in JB during this period, and I can tell you firsthand so what's going on. So okay, so so before we start, as per usual, I do a bit of introduction about myself. Um, okay, so let's play this video. Um, okay, yeah. So my name is Ryan Koo. I'm the founder of Alpha Marketing. I am B&B Properties and FY Design. And basically, I'm a Malaysian. I'm a property investor, and I've been in Singapore since 2009. I'm also Singapore permanent resident. I have properties in KL, in Johor Bahru, Iskandar, in Singapore, and I've been in real estate for pretty much a long time. So in JB today, I run a number of businesses and that are related to real estate. I'm also part of ERA Johor, which is the same ERA brand that you can see in Singapore today. And ERA Johor is growing very strongly because I think a lot of people in Johor can associate with the ERA brand, which is a very big brand in Singapore, right? And I wrote books on Iskandar Malaysia. I talk about that a bit later. And those days when Iskandar was still a pretty hot thing, you see me in a lot of events talking for like for Iskandar Malaysia related topics, at Property Guru, ST Property, The Edge, iProperty, right? And I wrote a lot of articles in The Edge Singapore, quoted in Straits Times a few times, The Edge a few times, and about Iskandar Malaysia related topics, right? And I did a lot of presentations about Iskandar Malaysia overseas as well, in Hong Kong, in Indonesia, Singapore definitely. I don't know, but Singapore I don't really consider overseas anymore because Singapore is like home. And yeah, so as I mentioned, yeah, so I did a lot of property transactions, Singapore, Malaysia, include my own for customers on behalf of customers as an agent, right? And Alpha Marketing, basically the job is as a consultancy for individuals, but usually for corporates, right? We have property developers and other corporates who have some interest in Iskandar Malaysia, and we do some work for them. We have a Facebook group, which is called Malaysian Investors in Singapore. More than 10,000 members today. Many people are interested. And we talk about real estate. There's no spam. We talk about good, clean news, good questions. It's very newbie friendly. My businesses in JB, FY Design, interior design company, short-term rentals company. And yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I wrote two books on Iskandar Malaysia, one in 2013, one in 2018. Both are really relevant on Iskandar Malaysia. I think if you are someone who's interested in Iskandar Malaysia, this is definitely a book to buy. I don't think I have a real competitor in this segment, in the sense that nobody writes about Iskandar Malaysia in so detail. So a bit of qualification about myself as a property investor. I started off property investing back in 2007. This was my first purchase back in KL, where I bought a studio apartment for you can see 150,000 ringgit, and I could get a 12.8% gross rental yield. A lot of people look at this number and they like, "Oh, Ryan, 12.8% rental yield. Are you sure you're not bullshitting me?" But it's true. Those days, rental yields were super attractive, right? And of course today a lot of people find it hard to believe, but 12.8% rental yield, and I started off my property investment journey through buying this type of apartments in KL, one bedder studio apartments where high rental yield, and we got a good cash flow growing, and that was how I made my first pot of gold as a property investor. And I moved on to Iskandar Malaysia in 2009 when I came to Singapore. And in Singapore, I realized how big the difference between prices were between Singapore and Malaysia. And to me, Iskandar had a very good opportunity to bridge the gap. Iskandar and Singapore have a lot of potential win-win situations, which today some are being exploited, some are not. A lot of opportunities there. And this is one of my better, probably the best investment I had in Iskandar Malaysia so far, which I bought a strata office, grade A strata office in Iskandar Malaysia, which we still have a very decent yield today, between 4.8% to 6.8% yield. And prices are pretty stable. They have not really dropped. And yeah, so who says you can't make money in Iskandar Malaysia? You can, but of course it's difficult. I will talk about that later. And in Singapore, my first property was in 2012. After 3 years in Singapore, I decided that I could buy, and was a 999 property I bought in the city fringe of Singapore, and today a similar new launch a few hundred meters away is selling a lot higher. But I mean, Singapore is like that. Sometimes in Singapore, although not every property makes money in Singapore, but a lot of them do lah. I mean, I would say in Singapore, and if you in the past 10 years, 70, 80%, maybe even 90% of properties make money in Singapore. It's not too difficult to make money in Singapore. The only problem is entry, right? Whether you have enough money to play the game, right? And how much you actually make in the end, right? But in Singapore, it's not too difficult about making money in real estate, unlike many other countries. And I think that's why Singaporeans are very lucky, in a way, very spoiled very spoiled also, right? Because Singapore government has made a very stable and yet growing environment where property prices in Singapore always still do well. And I think this is something Malaysia, of course, lacks, and Malaysians are envious of. That how Singapore prices have done pretty well even in the COVID pandemic today. Okay, so among other things, I think this slide talks about things that I do in Iskandar Malaysia. I already mentioned it earlier, but this slide lets you see what I mentioned. Probably I'll not repeat myself too much. Okay, so how is Iskandar Malaysia during the COVID-19 pandemic? Okay, so let me go through. So of course, the pandemic which started in the year 2020 has had a very huge negative impact to many countries. Malaysia and Singapore both recorded GDP, negative GDP, right? So the economy actually shrank, which is only happens during the recessions, the worst of recessions, right? I think the last time we saw any shrinking of this kind in Asia was not even the 2009 financial. I think for Singapore was the 2009 financial crisis, but I think the closest thing we had in the realistic terms for Malaysia was a 1997 Asian financial crisis. I mean, Singapore had GDP contractions during SARS crisis, and I think even during 2009 crisis. But I think this one is pretty bad, as in the impact to the economy is on a wider scale. So you can see negative 5.8 Singapore, Malaysia had negative 5.6. Now, this is a high level number. A lot of people look at it and but what does it mean for JB, right? Now, JB, this is a photo taken of the causeway last year during the pandemic. And you can see the border is basically empty. And this is an unusual photo to many people, right? I mean, all these years, we have been conditioned to train ourselves in our mind that if you look at the bridge should be pretty much full most of the time, and traffic jams most of the time. And this is the first time, I guess, maybe in the history of the causeway, in the history of Johor and Singapore, that you see the causeway is so empty, right? And the only things you can see are basically lorries, and these lorries are the one that are carrying food and daily necessities from Malaysia to Singapore. They are the only people who can cross the border right now, right? They have special permission because Singapore need food, no food, how can? So the lorry can still go in. They have special permission, but basically everything else has been shut down. And if you ask me, the impact to Johor is big, right? And the reason why the impact to Johor is big is because Johor is a border city, right? Border city as in it sits next to Singapore and depends a lot on Singapore-based spending, right? So I think you probably heard this discussion before, right? People will say, does Singapore need JB more, or JB needs Singapore more? A lot of Singaporeans go to JB to spend, a lot of people in JB go to work in Singapore. So who needs each other more, right? And this debate has been done going on for a very long time. I think COVID also shows it that actually both countries, both cities, Johor Bahru and Singapore, have very big dependencies on each other. And of course, JB being the smaller city is pretty hard hit because we don't have Singaporeans spending on the weekend now. We don't have the Malaysians who are working in Singapore earning Singapore dollar. They also cannot spend uh, in in their home country now. They're stuck in Singapore. They cannot go back, right? And the other problem is also all the foreigners, Koreans and other nationalities that have been growing. These people have been growing in JB. They are also not able to spend in Johor Bahru. So, who was hardest hit in COVID? Tourism companies. Hotels, in JB we had Pan Pacific has closed down. Mutiara Hotel is closing down on the 31st of May. A lot of smaller hotels are shut down, and or open close. Their opening hours are not very stable because they don't have business, right? Airlines, right? Air Asia is already been in the red for pretty much the whole of 2020. Theme parks, Legoland was affected by COVID, uh, shut down temporarily for 2 weeks because of COVID cases within the theme park. They are still there. In case some of you ask, is Legoland still alive? I mean, they're a big company, right? So the big multinationals always can survive this kind of thing better. So they are still alive, but they did temporarily shut down because of COVID cases within the theme park, and of course, regulations prevent people from going to theme parks. Shopping malls, City Square in JBC Center, which is a very popular place for tourists because it's just opposite customs immigration. Lots of people go there on the weekends from Singapore, and City Square is basically gone. The McDonald's on the ground floor, a very popular McDonald's, has shut down. Actually, is replaced by Burger King. I think I saw the photos that day. Good lah. There's a new someone take up the space, Burger King. But City Square is pretty much the retail is pretty much in a difficult place right now. All forms of recreational spending. A lot of Singaporeans have to come to JB to do their hair, to do massage, to go spa, to go KTV, these kind of things. Eat, right? Eat bak kut teh and other foods which they think in Singapore don't have, or cook in a different style in Malaysia, which they enjoy. Right, all this in F&B in touristy areas, city center, all these are hit very hard. Right, oil and gas companies, because when people don't travel, oil and gas is down, usage is down. So oil and gas has had a very difficult past, I think, few years. I think oil and gas is had trouble period. Malaysia has a lot of businesses in oil and gas related, so they are affected. And generally, any business that depends on foreign spending or large ticket discretionary spending. I mean, I run an interior design company in JB, and they are definitely affected because a lot of people don't want to spend for ID right now at this period. And there are a lot of work delays because people can't get to work because of COVID restrictions and testing, uh, things like that. So Singapore also the same. I think Singapore, in renovation companies in Singapore are highly dependent on Malaysian workers, and so I think it came on the papers, right? A lot of renovation works in Singapore could not be done, could not be completed, or highly delayed because all the renovation companies had to sort out their worker arrangements, and many of them had to bring in their workers from Malaysia on a more permanent basis. Otherwise, they cannot complete work. So yeah, so JB is being a border city, right? It's very hard hit in the sense because we are very dependent on foreign spending, and without foreigners, when borders are closed, it's going to be a problem, right? So, but of course, there are people who are not so affected by COVID, right? Technology companies are generally unscathed. Most technology companies are okay. Food delivery, of course, logistic companies who do deliveries and stuff. Any retail sales that can be done online. Normally, these are very small items, small ticket items. Uh, Small stuff that you don't mind to buy online, single-use items. Not everything can be sold online. It's difficult to sell property online, for example. It's difficult to sell cars online, for example. Some of these things are not easily sold online, right? Although people keep saying, "Oh, everything have to pivot online," but I mean, it's not everything can pivot to online sales easily. Pharmacies, private clinics are doing well. Malaysia, I mean, we have a special group of people called the glove makers. Glove makers have been making a lot of money. Those plus neutral gloves, right, for hospital users, right? They are making a lot of money, especially during the COVID period. And I think if you ask me, Singapore banks, finance companies, asset companies, stockbrokers, all these are doing pretty well. They are not really affected by COVID. All right, I mean, yeah, they are not really affected by COVID, right? And that comes to my next point, right, which is about SMEs versus MNC. So SMEs, small medium enterprises, versus a multinational corporation. So um, in Singapore, you have a lot of MNCs, right? Singapore is a regional hub. Many companies have they have their regional, global, headquarters in Singapore. And most likely in your Singapore, the chances that you are employed by an MNC, right, are pretty high because many MNCs are there, and that's how Singapore is, right, as an economy. Same thing in KL. KL also has a better proportion of MNCs, and I compare this to JB. Now JB doesn't have that many MNCs. JB is a SME economy. Johor Bahru, Iskandar is a SME economy. So as an SME economy, what happens to SME economy is that companies are smaller, right? All these are small businessmen, right? And running their own businesses, right? And the problem with SMEs is they can be very profitable. I'm not saying that SMEs don't make money, but the problem that during a crisis like this, especially a prolonged crisis due to pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, is that SMEs normally don't have so big balance sheet, right? Normally their cash reserves are not so big compared to a multinational. So if a pandemic or a recession is drags on for a very long period, like COVID now, which is now we are entering our second year, right? First year 2020, now second year 2021, we probably won't see a real recovery until 2022. So for many SMEs, when business is bad and you ask them to survive for 2 years, that is pretty tough, right? Compared to multinationals who have big balance sheets, they got a lot of money, they can go to capital markets, they can go to banks, they can access funding more easily. They can do plans on longer term because they are multinational, big company, and they want to do many things. So multinationals will survive a pandemic better. So I mean, there always used to be a saying when I was young. I mean, if you want job stability, a multinational of course is better because multinational is big. If you want to learn everything all the way from the ground up, of course SMEs are good in a sense because SMEs you may have a chance to look at the entire business. But I mean, depends. I mean, there's no right or wrong. But I mean, the general idea is that JB is a very big SME economy. A lot of MNCs in JB are actually factories. I mean, you don't really see so many regional offices or things like that. There are some back-end offices, some BPO kind of BPO style business process outsourcing offices in JB, but generally they're not HQ headquarters or head office kind of things set up. So there are a lot of, like I said, small medium enterprises, and again, during a pandemic, this is bad for JB. Good to be an entrepreneur, to come to JB to be an entrepreneur because it's easy to start a business in Johor, right, in Malaysia. So if you want to be a businessman, come to JB to Malaysia is a good thing because its cost of business is low, and you can start a business quite easily. But like I said, during a COVID-19 pandemic like this, being an SME is tough because if business is bad, uh, and bad for a long, long time, like now, it is tough. So this is where JB suffers, and I think suffers more than average. I mean, of course, SMEs everywhere in Singapore or KL are also affected, but I mean, JB being a larger proportion of SMEs, this is a bigger problem for JB. Okay, so now how does this come to the property market? Okay, so enough about the economy. So how does it affect the property market? The first thing I'm going to talk about is rentals. Rentals have gone to, in a in a single word, go to shit already, right? It's really pretty bad. Rentals have dropped like a lot, right? And not to say that they were very high in the first place, but rents have dropped a lot. And number one is because borders are closed. Foreigners are not here. So when you don't have foreigners, less foreigners working here or living here, right? Definitely rents are going to drop. And this has hit the high-end market first, right? So the high-end markets like Putri Harbour, Danga Bay, JBC Centre, parts of the Mas Chaya, and where high-end, where the foreigners live, right? Rentals have dropped because less foreigners. Very simple. Borders closed, so yeah, so we're screwed, right? In that sense, no Singaporeans. Don't talk about Singaporeans. Don't talk about Koreans or Japanese and all these other long-term residents. We don't have Singaporeans also. Problem. Second issue is because of COVID, there's no tourism, and because there's no tourism, there is no short-term rental. So hotels also died. You have read in the paper, some hotels even convert themselves into like long-term accommodation already. They start to rent out their hotel rooms by month, right? In order to cover to get some revenue. And if you imagine hotels doing that, you can imagine all the Airbnb units have also no longer doing Airbnb. All of them have returned to long-term rentals. So initially, JB, we always have this choice where you can choose to do Airbnb or you can choose to do long-term. Some properties are more suited to Airbnb. Some properties are more suited to long-term. But now everybody go back to long-term because you can't do Airbnb anyway. So by law, right, and because it's also because of no tourism, so by law, in the sense that government impose restrictions, right? They don't want to have COVID spreading, so they say no Airbnb. So yeah, so now all the go back to long term, and again depress our rentals. And number three, of course, in a bad economy, when people are losing jobs, their salary cuts and things, I mean, offers become very low, and you only have local tenants. So local tenants offer very low rate. I give you an example, right? We were talking about the other day how a studio apartment in Tebrau, right? Tebrau is a local zone, costs the same for rent as much as a high-end studio apartment in Putri Harbour. That means, two different locations, right? And the apartment in Tebrau is pretty shit, right? It's a pretty lousy building, right? But the rental rate today is the same as a high-end apartment, nice building in Putri Harbour. So basically, there's no premium anymore. Wherever it is, all the rental rate is the same for whether one-bedder studio, whole JB, two-bedders the same rate, all JB, because basically there's no premium, right? There's no foreigner, right? There's no need to have a distinction between high-end property and low-end property. Everything's going by size, right? And that is sad. That is sad. And actually today, a lot of owners ask me, Ryan, I cannot get rental and things like that. I mean, sometimes the rents are too low. The tenant profile no good. I mean, I always insist in the times like this, if the tenant still cannot pay full deposit, that means 2 month deposit and a half month utility deposit, you don't accept, right? If you're not happy the tenant profile, don't accept, because the rents are so low anyway. No reason to really force yourself to accept a tenant, right? At this stage, right? Yeah. So that's my opinion right now. All right. I'm waiting for border to open and COVID and foreigners come back in again. And then I think rentals will recover to where they were prior to COVID, right? So that's how rental is affected right now. So rental is pretty bad, and that's my advice to all owners, right? If it's bad, then don't rent. It's okay. I mean, no point. Don't force yourself, right? Because this is COVID is a temporary situation. Don't lock yourself into a 1 year, 2 year tenancy when the market is at the lowest, right? So how about high-rise condominiums? High-rise condominiums. This is a photo of Tiga, which is a beautiful property. I think sold very well. It's good price right now. But then I digress. So I've learned one thing after so many years looking at the Johor Bahru market is that locals definitely prefer to buy landed property, right? If you are Johorian, right, you still prefer to buy landed property in Johor. So a lot of locals do not buy condo, right? This is unlike KL, unlike Penang, unlike Singapore, where buying condo is more accepted. In KL, Penang, Singapore, people buy condo and they accept condo. I mean, they don't feel bad about it. They don't feel like they're getting cheated or whatever. But in this other cities is okay. But people in Johor still buy landed, and there are a few reasons for that. Number one, I think because the high-end condo market is immature, not many people live in condos. If you look at Johor property market prior to 2012, there are not a lot of nice condos in JB. The nice condos in JB only started appearing only just about 10 years ago, which is fairly recent, right, for a city like JB. Right now we got a lot of high-end condos, but last time 10 15 years ago don't have. So people need to get used to it. A lot of locals don't, and because they still stay in landed. And the reason why they buy landed is because number one, I don't have a slide on this. Do have a slide. Because number one, there's still a lot of land to build landed houses in Johor, which is true. True and not true, right? Yes, there's still a lot of land, but not all this land are developable for landed house, right? And you can see even landed houses are going, even further away. So and the other problem with high-rise condominium, and then so the travel time is short, right? So because people there's no traffic jam in JB, or not much traffic jam in JB. So there's only a few places in JB that really got traffic jam. Pasir Gudang Highway is one example. JB Center to Tebrau is another example. But traffic is by and large still manageable. So most people still prefer to buy landed because you don't have to stay in the city center for that. So yeah, I'll cover this topic a bit later. But basically, the other problem with high-end condo in JB is that a lot of developers still have unsold stock. Most developers in they sell high-end condominiums, they have maybe 10 to 30% unsold stock. And because the unsold stock have been sitting on it for a very long time, some of these developers have started to sell cheaper, right, during COVID as well, for cash flow purposes, and because all their profits are basically sitting in this 10-30% unsold stock. So and the problem when they start selling cheaper is that they're basically selling cheaper than the buyers who bought from them earlier, years ago. And that's why for many owners, why you have problems selling your condo today in Johor Bahru is because the developers still got stock and developers selling cheaper than you. Simply put, I mean, unfortunately, you want to blame the developer, you can, but legally they're not doing anything wrong. yeah, so it's a good time to buy because effectively, if you are owner, of course, it's bad news. But if you haven't buy, it's good news because you're effectively buying cheaper, right, than people who bought many years ago, right? So and until developers clear the unsold stock, right, it's unlikely that you will be able to sell your stock because developer can definitely give a better deal than most owners. Okay. So let me go to auction quickly. So how about auction? People ask me, Ryan, is there going to be a lot of auction because just now you mentioned the economy is bad. People are losing jobs. A lot of SMEs have problem of closing down. Border closed, right? No foreigner. Property prices drop, and then some people cannot pay, and then go into auction. You can buy auction, and we look at auction today. A lot of purchases have been coming in at about 4xx, 5x PSF per square foot, right? Ringgit per square foot. We see buying now at this level. 4 5 years ago, buying used to happen about 5xx, but now you can see some drop until 4xx only people buy. And this is where we're seeing auction going on today. Will there be more auctions? Yes, but the problem auction definitely is you have to be careful about hidden costs because when you buy a property, auction property is as is where is, and unlike other countries, you can expect some of these properties to have been so-called semi-abandoned for some time. So there could be damage, unpaid fees, unpaid taxes, things like that, right? And then even though there are many auctions, it doesn't mean that you have every option available. You may some auction units are what we call lousy units, right? Poor facing, low floor. They are a reason why they auction, right? Because the owner, the buyer, didn't buy a good unit, right? That's why he cannot rent, he cannot sell, right? That's why he end up auction, right? There are reasons why auction units become auction, right? Sometimes people think auction is like the best thing to do, but I mean there are some T and C, right? And so like I said, still limited choices. It doesn't mean, like some people told me, oh Ryan, this project got auction unit, this project is no good. No, it doesn't mean it's no good. I went to see some auction units. Not every auction unit is a good unit, right? Could be cheap, but doesn't mean that they are nice unit. You know what I mean? Nice quality facing unit. So you still have limited choice in that sense. So the reason why buying also occurs at 4xx, 5xx PSF because this is what we call floor price. Why floor price? Because construction value, right? If you want to build the same unit today, construct the same property today, you can't do it for below that price, right? That means if you buy a 4xx, 5xx PSF, that is already pretty much the land cost and the construction cost already today. So people know that if I buy below that, I'm buying quite cheap because no one will build the same property for higher than that, right? So I believe that this price will likely remain. I mean, unlikely auctions will drop to 3xx, 2xx. I mean, people are waiting, all right, will they drop even further, another 100, 200 per square foot? I think it's extremely unlikely. Because 100, 200 per square foot, you can't even build low cost property, in Malaysia now. It's pretty cheap really. 100, 200, 300 per square foot is very, very cheap. Yeah, I mean, if you're not from construction industry, I'm not from construction industry, but I mean, if you do the math, 2xx PSF, 3xx PSF is very difficult to build same property on that price. So sometimes I believe 4xx, 5xx is the floor price right now if you are looking to buy auction, right? And of course, like I mentioned earlier, auctions are not necessarily the best buys in the market. You can still look at secondary market and get pretty good deals, bargain with the owners, right? Don't wait for it to drop auction. That's also a good thing because you may, in a secondary market like that, you may find a better quality unit, right? And still buy around the same price or even if a bit higher, so never mind because at least you can see all the hidden costs, and there's no hidden cost, sorry, if you buy through secondary market like that. Okay, so landed property, just now maybe I talk halfway, confused myself a bit. Still very healthy. So the thing about landed property is, many years ago, right, there are some owners from Singapore come and find, hey Ryan, I have this house, like landed house, this bungalow, I cannot sell. Normally it's bungalow lah, because sometimes Singaporean, they went to buy bungalow, right? They buy damn big bungalow and then they don't know how to, they don't stay in it. They treat it as an investment, right? And then they don't do any renovation. When you buy a big house, right, you cannot find tenant if the house is empty. No kitchen, no aircon. Who want to rent your house, right? I mentioned this many times before, right? You buy a landed house. I think some buyers forgot about this. They buy a landed house. The house doesn't come with any furnishing at all, right? And then you expect a tenant to come in and say, I want to rent this house. But it doesn't work like that, right? Because if the house has nothing inside, then people also find it difficult to rent. And no landed house, they are a little bit of choice, right? In Johor, right? I mean, there are some choices, right? It's like total, not to say that there's no choice for this kind of people. So some people got stuck in this kind of landed properties. I remember still Horizon Hill clusters. People can't tell, Ryan, I got one cluster, 1.1 something, can I sell? And then interestingly, This group of people who bought landed property, most of them have been able to sold by now. By now, the year 2021, we have 2020. I called out a couple of owners recently, those people own bungalows and all that, who used to not be able to sell many years ago. They can sell already, which is good news. Which shows you one thing, that in Johor, people still buy landed. People still buy landed. If you bought landed property, eventually you can sell one, right? Maybe your price is not as good. You maybe lost money a bit. You may only make a bit money. Doesn't matter. But at least people look at the house and willing to buy. This is unlike high-rise condo in JB, where people don't even want to buy because for own stay. I'm talking about own stay, because to them they prefer to buy landed. I mean, not to say they got no money. Local people can have money, but especially those businessmen in Johor or high salary employees, right? They can buy that price range, but at that price range they will prefer to buy landed. Okay, so transactions are still healthy for landed property. Like for example, we are marketing Estuary Gardens in Putri Harbour, sold very well. I think almost 50 units, maybe more than 50 units. I am not sure. In the past 4 or 5 months, selling very well at the new prices. The developer has dropped the price somewhat. Secondary market transactions are doing very well. They're also in Estuary Gardens. So and then the other project we're marketing a 2-story terrace house, mass market properties, anything between, I would say 400 plus thousand and above to about 700, 800,000 ringgit. This kind of 2-story terrace house also selling very well. We saw one, Meridian East in Pasir Gudang selling very well. We are also marketing a project called Layang Kasa in Masai nearby. Also, I think about 7-8 units in the past 2 months. Senadi Hills, I think, has sold probably about 70 units in the past couple of months. I mean, since September, that's about 5 months, all right? 70 units in about 5 months. So I think that's pretty good. I mean, end of the day, like I mentioned earlier, locals, the property of choice is a normal 2-story terrace, right? And these are doing pretty well. So people ask me, Ryan, property market, is it dead in Johor? I say it's not dead. I mean, it's depending on what you are looking at, right? And the problem with a lot of people from Singapore those days that we buy a lot of condo, like, because we have a mentality condos okay, right? Including myself, I bought condos also in JB, and these are some of my poorer performing properties. You can find tenant for rental, but it's very hard to sell because locals don't buy, and you only want to sell to another foreigner, but you can't sell to another foreigner because developers still got unsold stock and he's selling cheaper than you. So you're stuck somewhere until the developer clear the stock. As I mentioned earlier, you can't sell a condo. But if you bought a landed, very likely you are okay. You are okay. I mean, at the very least, in the worst case scenario, you can still sell and exit your purchase of a landed property, right? So yeah, this slide's about buyer mentality. So the reason why I say landed property is still okay is because land is still plentiful. So people drive around JB and say, hey, still got a lot of land. They buy landed houses, but even as it's a yes and no thing. So although landed property still people can buy, and landed property developers can still build somewhat affordably, right? But we're already reaching the edges in some cases, like places like Masai and Kulai, where you can buy the cheapest landed properties now. They are not exactly near, right? You still need, in most cases, Masai Kulai is about 1 hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour to JBC Center. It's not near, right? So you still travel a little, somewhat already at the edges of, I always say more than 1 hour travel time is far, right? So originally 45 minutes, 1 hour from Masai Kulai to JBC Center. So it's a bit, we're already reaching the edges, right? I believe you give Johor Bahru another 5-10 years, condo living will be more acceptable. As people start to understand how condo living is like and traffic jams become worse, because traffic in JB is still manageable, but worse than before. If I wake up in the morning and I travel to JB Center, similarly from if I stay Austin or Tebrau and I come to JB Center, the traffic is pretty heavy, right? It's not traffic jam scenario like KL. KL have big traffic jams, Bangkok, even Singapore, right? Traffic jam in the morning, right? But JB, you don't really have a traffic jam. Heavy traffic, but not standstill, right? Very rarely standstill, right? So travel time is still reasonable. So because of that, people don't want to buy condo in city center. They prefer to buy landed in the suburbs, and that's I think a common trend anyway. If you can afford it, you always prefer to stay in the suburbs in a bigger house, because if travel time is still short, right? Travel time is the key metrics here, right? So if travel time is bad, then you don't mind to buy a condo nearer to where you work because you don't want your travel time to be long to office, right? So there's no MRT in JB. There's no MRT in JB, right? So versus KL in Singapore, so people still drive, and because again there's no traffic jam, so we don't need MRT, internal MRT in JB yet. The demand has not reached that level, right? And as I mentioned, right, local prefer landed where possible to buy for own use. To rent is okay. Local don't mind to rent in condominium. They may have some purpose where they need to rent to be in city center, but buy landed. right? And this is actually very similar to KL mentality 15, 20 years ago. Before KL had traffic jams, big traffic jams. Before KL had MRT. KL's the same thing, right? If you are from KL, right, you prefer to stay in landed house, of course. Everyone wants to stay in landed house first, but either once your landed house become too far away from where you work, then you don't mind considering to buy a condo nearer to town to where you work because you can't afford to travel for so long time. Okay. So is there any good news? Ryan, you have been very pessimistic so far, and you've been telling us a lot of somewhat negative news about Johor Bahru. Is there any good news? Good news number one is supply is down. I think I've shown this slide before, maybe in my earlier presentations, but and this slide maybe is up to until 2019, 2020 only. But it shows you but after this anyway, it's almost zero anyway. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that new supply has more or less come to a standstill, almost zero, especially for high-rise condo. Okay, landed mass market still have, but high-rise condo, this slide is basically focused on high-end property. High-rise condo, high-end, almost zero. So most of the completions was in 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020 almost all dropped a lot. I think the only major one we're looking at is only RNF in 2022 next year. Other than that, is almost zero. Even Forest City, right? Forest City, the poster child for high high density, a lot of condo development, right? In Johor, also no more building new phases now. I don't know how many of you know that, right? Forest City only basically had 2 phases plus their latest phase, which is not a big phase, it's a very small phase, right? They have no longer building any major condominium projects in Forest City. They also slow down. They stop almost zero, right? So what I'm trying to tell you is the good news is at least we don't have new supply. That's important because you don't want to continue to flood the market with unit when we are already oversupply. We don't want even more unit to come supply. And the good news is that as one COVID stops and border open, we can have this demand growth again. Actually, prior to COVID, we can see very healthy demand coming in, right? Rentals are very stable and in some places going up, right? Prior to COVID, right? And you can see a good economy coming because a lot of Koreans came in to Johor, this one group, and then of course Singaporeans also can see some trend of them coming back, right? Prior to COVID. So yeah, no new supply coming in. The piece of good news is RTS, right, which is the nickname for the road to Singapore, or the MRT, right? Basically, it's an MRT, right, between Johor Bahru City Centre and Woodlands. So the RTS was signed last year in July. Construction has started. Both governments, Singapore side, I think, has issued 2 tenders for construction, right? One is for the station and one is for this tracks over the water. Singapore side has issued tender already. Malaysia also has issued 1 tender for groundworks on the Bukit Jaga side. So this is basically an MRT station linking Woodlands North to Johor Bahru City Centre. This is a very nice map about it. Right, I talk about it in my earlier videos. If you want to find out more, you can watch my earlier videos as well, right, about the RTS, right? And it's very important because we need to fix this connectivity issue between Malaysia and Singapore. We've been discussing about RTS for ages, I think for years, right? I think now close to 10 years, right? Since I came in as a property into Johor, but at least right now it's under construction, and we're happy to have it because lots of Malaysians work in Singapore. They travel Singapore up and down. A lot of Singaporeans come to Johor on weekends. I mean, I talk about this in more detail in my earlier YouTube videos. So if you want to find out more, please watch my earlier YouTube videos about RTS, my earlier YouTube videos about RNF Princess Cove, right? I think these are very interesting things, right? So RTS is coming, right? We want to fix problems like traffic jams. This is prior to COVID, right? You never see this today. It's very sad, right? Sometimes those days, sad. This is a good problem, right? Now we don't even have this problem anymore. We can't even travel across the border anymore, right? And yeah, I see so many people, so much demand, right? So much potential demand, and win-win if we can get Johor and Singapore to integrate better, right? So the RTS carries 10,000 people every hour. We definitely will see more travel between Johor and Singapore if that happens, and that would definitely push up property demand in Johor as well, right? And completion of the RTS is in 2026, which is not very long already. If you consider next year is really 2022 when the economy start to recover. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is about 5 years from when from next year when the what do you call it, economy starts to recover. 2026. And the important thing is these are some artist impressions of the RTS. The important thing, of course, is that we have a single immigration, right, where you can Malaysia. You can see here number one, you enter the building, Malaysian CIQ, Singapore CIQ, both on the same site. So that means you don't have to queue twice when you queue for your passport, right? So you clear all your passport immigration on one side of the border. When you arrive on the other side of the other country, you don't have to queue a second time, right? Today you have to queue both sides, but in the new system you want to queue only one time, right? And that should save a lot of travel time as well, right? Okay, linking Johor Bahru to Singapore means we can get everybody in Singapore, up to 5 over million to 6 over million people in Singapore, to visit Johor Bahru and vice versa. And I think that can only be good for the Johor Bahru economy to be more integrated to the Singapore economy, right? A lot of people in Singapore don't drive, right? And because they don't drive, going to JB is a hassle. So fixing this will be a big thing. So 2026 is an important one, a silver lining that we see. And of course, property prices are a big gap. I am lazy to update this thing. Singapore property prices have increased in 2020 and 2021. A lot of developers have been selling very well. And yeah, so the gap between Iskandar and Singapore, in fact, is widening, and that will have to narrow. So the other good news is, of course, vaccination. Malaysia has started vaccination in February last month, right? Singapore earlier. Singapore started in January, and Singapore has a smaller population to cover, right? So and Singapore actually, I think maybe they got to be a priority because they got more, they managed to get their vaccines earlier. So but Malaysia, we started vaccination in February for frontliners. In April we will start. Actually, April is pretty soon. April is like tomorrow. So April will happen for the elderly and vulnerable group. But we were told that it seems that they will be able to start for the rest of the population. Initially was in May, as you see here, but I think they'll be able to start the rest of the population quite soon also, because not all the elderly and vulnerable have registered. Of course, there are some people who are still hesitating to go for vaccination, right? So we should be able to get the rest of the population start vaccination by May, and expected completion of the population of the vaccination will be by February 2022. But I mean, this is for entire Malaysia. Malaysia is a big country, right? Of course, major cities like KL, Johor, Penang will have vaccination earlier, right? So KL, Penang, Johor, I expect KL, Penang, Johor to get vaccinated first, because we are the bigger population hubs, right? And only when we say February 22 is probably talking about rural areas where there are less people, right? So yeah, vaccination is important because we want to have COVID cases go down. As you can see, that I cut and paste the COVID cases in Malaysia versus Singapore. You can see such a contrast. At first, Singapore was very high last year in 2020. Then, but when the time Singapore cases start to drop, Malaysia cases start to increase, and we were in trouble a little bit early this year, where cases rose to like over 3,000 per day. That was pretty bad. But now Malaysia cases have dropped again to roughly 1,000-ish. 1,000 is still pretty high. They need to be lower, right? Yeah, they need to be lower, but at least we're on a downward trend. We were a bit worried early this year whether it will go even higher, right? But at least now it's got back to 1,000. And both the foreign ministers, Hishamuddin and Vivian Balakrishnan, met I think in Malaysia a few days ago. And one of the things that, if you notice from I copied this from the government official press release. So number one, they're talking about vaccination plans, right? They want to recognize each other's vaccine certificate with a view to facilitate cross-border travel. Malaysia and Singapore have a very close economic tie, so definitely Malaysia-Singapore border reopening is one of the key priorities for both countries, right? So vaccination is very important to do this, right, and restore cross-border travel ASAP. So I think this is good because by 2022 we should expect borders to open. Vaccination shouldn't take longer than that, right? So final thoughts. People ask me, so Ryan, what do I do now? If you're a property owner, then I think the best advice I can do is try to hold as much as you can and ride it out, right? Because unfortunately, you now is a down cycle, and this is one of the longest down cycles for real estate in Malaysia. I mean, I've not been in a down cycle so long in Malaysia. I think very few of us would have predicted a down cycle so long. very few of us have predicted a global pandemic in COVID-19 would have happened last year. I mean, very few people predicted that, and it's tough, but you have to write it out. If you have not bought in Iskandar, I think it's a good time to buy. Even myself, I'm trying to reorganize some of my portfolio so that I can look to purchase, right? Because I think there are definitely some good deals out there. I just had to figure out some of my financing issues, right, and how to reorganize some of my portfolio. But definitely there are some good buys out there. And property downturns, economic recessions are the best time to buy. Unfortunately, nobody listens, right? People still have a herd mentality, a fear of missing out. Especially in Singapore, this is pretty bad. I think if you ask me, in Singapore has a very big herd mentality, fear of missing out mentality, right? Singapore, yeah, it's like that, right? But I mean, other countries also to a certain extent, but Singapore is pretty obvious, right? So people don't buy unless other people buy, and if so many people are buying, you're probably a bit too late, right? You know what I mean? Sometimes you have to be a bit contrarian and buy when nobody is buying, right? That's when you can get the best deals because you have no competition, right? And if you are keen to explore uh, deals in Iskandar Malaysia, there are a lot of good deals. I'm not talking just about residential. We have a retail. We have a very good deal also. A bit high ticket. We're talking about over 20 million ringgit, right? But for very, very good quality retail lots, right? If someone's keen. There are other stuff also if it depends on your budget and what you're interested in. But I think definitely if you can be a bit contrarian and buy when nobody else is buying to get the best deal, this is the thing. And this is the time to do it. Iskandar also like this back in 2011, 2010. I still remember 2010, 2011 when I first heard Iskandar, I said no lah, no such thing. But 2010, 2011, really, really you can buy very cheap stuff. I mean, even if you bought Iskandar Malaysia, back in 2009, 2010, 2011, you're still making money today. You're still sitting on profit because the prices then were so much cheaper. The price really, really shot up in Iskandar Malaysia in 2012, 2013. Everybody started buying, right? When Iskandar became very popular, come on newspaper a lot. Everyone started buying, and that was probably the worst time to buy because too much hype and too many people buy, including myself. We make some mistake there, and we buy too expensive, right? Because everybody is buying. So actually, the best time to buy is when nobody is buying, right? Like now, but especially for high-rise condominium, there's a lot of good deals. Even landed also, like I said, it's a good deal. But yeah, so if you're keen to explore, please drop me a private message email. I hope you enjoy this video today. Thank you very much. If you like what we have, please subscribe to our Facebook, our YouTube video, like, share, subscribe, and you can join our Facebook group MISS Malaysia Investors Singapore or Ryan Cool Property Listings. Thank you very much. Thank you.